Hi, my name is JJ Togans, and I'm a graduate student at Miami University studying social psychology. In this video, I'll be discussing the ins and outs of the application process for applying to graduate school programs in psychology. More specifically, I'll be discussing 4 different in-depth topics about the application process. First, I'll be going over how to identify appropriate graduate school programs and potential faculty advisors. Second, I'll be talking about how to identify writers for your letters of recommendations and when to approach them about writing your letters. Third, I'll be touching very briefly on the GRE. And then finally, I'll close out by talking about how to write personal statements and the best ways to go about editing those personal statements. If there's a particular topic among those 4 that you're interested in, over here I'll be listing timestamps that will allow you to go directly to the discussion of those topics in this video if you're interested in that. Otherwise, we'll jump right into it, starting with the discussion on how to identify appropriate programs and potential faculty advisors. So the first thing that you should know when applying to graduate school programs is when the deadlines for these applications tend to be. If you're applying to doctoral programs in psychology, the deadlines typically fall in early December, starting at December 1st most of the time, going as late as December 15th. That's typically the case for these types of programs. Sometimes they do go as late as mid-January or even late January, but most of the time early December is what you should be aiming for. If you're looking for terminal master's programs, those deadlines tend to be in mid to late January. So if that's what you're looking for, just a master's degree in psychology, you can typically get those application materials wrapped up over winter break. But if you're doing a doctoral program, towards the end of the fall semester is typically where you should be aiming to get all of that taken care of. Now, in terms of identifying appropriate programs, there are a couple ways that you can go about doing that, 3 of which I will outline here in this video. The first of which is to look at scholarly papers in the area of research that you're wanting to go to graduate school for. So for example, if you're interested in studying stereotyping and stereotype processes, you should probably be looking at papers published on that topic that have come out in the last 5 years or so. This will give you insight into who is currently conducting that research and who is currently the most leading expert on those particular topics. So that way, when you go to actually be a part of their program, you know the person that you're going to be studying under and mentoring you will be providing you with the most up-to-date information in that particular area, meaning when you graduate, you will also be an up-to-date expert on that particular area. Another way that you can go about identifying faculty advisors and programs is to ask graduate students and faculty in your current department. I think this is a really underutilized resource for a lot of undergraduate students because they don't recognize that grad students and faculty are very well connected with other experts in the area, even if it's not in a specific area that they themselves are doing research in. So myself, for example, I am an attitudes researcher, but I'm well aware of many other faculty and grad students at other universities across the country that study other topics in social psychology, such as communication, prejudice and discrimination, stigma, so on and so forth. So definitely do not be afraid to approach or ask different faculty members in your department because they might be able to point you in the right direction in terms of identifying the best fit in terms of program and faculty advisors for you to make the most out of your graduate school experience. And then lastly, my third recommendation is to use what's called the APA Guide to Graduate School. Now, this is a catalog of sorts that indexes different psychology programs throughout the United States as well as Canada, and it organizes them by both discipline and the location of the program. So what I mean by that is that this book will identify different psychology programs at different universities, regardless of whether it's a master's, a doctoral program, a PsyD, or EdD. All these programs at all these different universities are organized by state. So if you are interested in applying to programs specifically in the Midwest, for example, you can look at states in the Midwest and identify universities that have specific programs that you think would be best fit for you. And then using that index, you can look at the websites for those different programs and look at specifically what faculty are there and what research that they are currently conducting. Similarly, it also organizes graduate programs by discipline. So if you are interested in social psychology, for example, every single social psychology program, whether it's PhD or master's, is going to be listed in the back of the book. And what you can do is just go through each of those universities specifically and say, yeah, I think some of the people that are there really align with what I'm interested in. I'll consider applying to that particular program. So it's a really easy and straightforward way of identifying different programs that could be a good fit for you. So now let's talk about letters of recommendation. Ideally, you should be reaching out to your potential letter writers, I would say at the very least 2 to 3 months before you start to apply to their programs. By applying in this, or by giving your letter writers this notice in advance, it gives them enough time to start thinking about what it is that they can specifically say about you in your letter. You want to give them enough time to generate a thoughtful and sincere letter that will reflect the things that you want them to in your application to make you best to make you a good candidate for that particular program that you're applying to. So now that brings us to the question of how do you identify your letter writers? Well, there are a couple different ways you can go about this, but ideally you want to identify people who can really speak to your strengths that will reflect what it takes to be a good grad student. Meaning you want to have letter writers that can speak to your ability to be independent, conduct research on your own, generate thoughtful research questions, be able to analyze the data that you get stemming from your different projects, or just being a reliable, trustworthy student, you know? Like if you are a student who's been in a particular professor's class for multiple semesters and you've demonstrated that you are a good student in all of those classes, meaning you've got really good grades, that's something that your letter writers can vouch for and speak to because they have a lot of experience with you and they know what you're capable of. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm going to briefly talk about the GRE. There are other resources listed on the Miami Psychology Department website that you can check out for the GRE, so I highly recommend you check that out if you haven't already. What I would recommend in terms of a timeline for applying to grad school and taking the GRE is that you give yourself enough time to take it again if you think you aren't going to be happy with your first score or you're not entirely confident about the testing process in general. So given how expensive the GRE is and how intense of an exam it is, you want to make sure that you give yourself enough time to have the necessary funds ready to take it again, as well as enough time to study and brush up on the areas that you might not have done so well on the first time in case that is something you want to do. So just make sure you plan appropriately with respect to the deadlines that you have for your different application deadlines. So now we're going to talk about personal statements. Now, for me, personal statements I think are by far the most challenging part of the application process, but it's also the most rewarding once you come out on the other end of it and say, wow, I wrote a kick-ass essay. I think this is going to really impress the people on the other end. This is why I am a strong applicant. This is why I should be going to grad school. But there are a couple traps that I think many applicants suffer from or can fall into if they're not careful, if they don't take the proper time to mold or form their essays the way that they want them to be. So a few tips that I have are the following. First, I highly recommend that you do not be redundant in your personal statement with respect to your CV. Your CV is going to be a list of all the different skills that you have, all the different accomplishments that you've acquired throughout your undergraduate career. But a lot of the time in people's first drafts of their personal statements, they're essentially just saying the same thing that their CV already says. They're saying, I got this award from Psych High, or I got research experience in a lab by working with a certain professor for X number of years. They already see that through your CV. What you want to say in your personal statement instead is what those specific experiences did for you, how they helped you get to the point to where you are now that you feel comfortable enough and ready to thrive in a graduate program. So if you did work in a research lab, for instance, don't simply say, I worked in a research lab. Say what that process taught you. So for example, you could say something akin to, by working in a research lab, I have now acquired the skills necessary to conduct my own research. I now understand the ins and outs of the research process, of the scientific method. I know how to best write consent forms because I've given 2,000 of them to different participants over all the studies that I've run. I now understand how to generate novel research ideas by listening to the grad students in the lab talk about their research ideas and how they came up with them. You want to show that it's not that you were simply in the presence of being in a research lab, but that being in that lab taught you different things that will make you successful. Really speak to what those skills did for you and how they benefited your growth. Now, related to that, you also want to be intentional with how you phrase things, meaning that you want to demonstrate to the other person reading your personal statement that you engage in all these different activities for a specific reason, that you put thought into those different behaviors going into them. So you could say something like, in order to get more hands-on experience conducting research or assisting with the research process, I joined 3 different research labs, or maybe not 3, but I joined a research lab to get a better understanding of the research process because I know this is something that I wanted to do. Again, it shows intention, it shows forethought, and it shows that you know what you're doing in terms of getting the proper skills that you will need to be successful in a graduate program. And you want to do that for every single thing that you talk about in your statement. Show intention, show that you know what you're doing. And lastly, I would highly recommend getting as many eyes on your draft as possible. So what this means is you want to have different faculty advisors look through it. You want to have grad students read through it. Get as much feedback on it as you can because, again, different programs want different things, and depending on the program that you're applying to or depending on how you phrase different things based on your own experiences, there might be better ways to articulate that, and getting different perspectives on how to articulate that in your essay is very valuable. Similar to that, it doesn't hurt at all to write multiple drafts of your personal statement that are independent of one another. So what this means is that you, in one instance, write one draft of your statement, like just take your hands to the keyboard and don't take them off for whatever amount of time you need to write that essay. And then once you finish that first one, do it again like an hour later without thinking about what the other essay you just wrote was. By doing this, like just letting your thoughts spill onto the paper, you get an idea in that particular moment how these different experiences that you've had have led to your personal and professional growth, and just finding different ways to articulate them and tease them apart to hopefully at the end take all those independent essays and put them together to make one final one that is a strong essay that reflects who you are and what your goals are. So thank you for your time in watching this video. I hope it was helpful in some capacity. If there are any questions or concerns, I'd be happy to address them. And just email me here at the link listed below. Otherwise, I thank you for your time and I hope you have a great day. Thanks.